Albion Online is created and managed by a game company called Sandbox Interactive, or SBI for short, and in my opinion they do a pretty damn good job of running the game, but they have one fatal flaw that will likely kill the game sooner or later, and it's that they don't look to revise the content they put out nearly enough. After I returned to Albion a couple years ago, every big update has gone pretty much the exact same way. SBI releases a content update that targets something that the game needs, and for the first month or so, it's great and everybody loves it, myself included. The content patches they put out are honestly really well made. They make sense in terms of what the game needs, they're polished, usually minimal bugs, etc. But they're not perfect. So after that honeymoon phase ends and the hype around the update dies down a little bit, the issues with the new content start to come to light. People figure out the meta and exploit it to its full potential, or simple mechanics don't work as intended, breaking parts of the content, or even population problems plague the content, making it unenjoyable. There's always something unintended that really stifles the enjoyment of the content. Now, I don't think that anyone expects SBI to be perfect in their implementation of new content. It's fine that it has problems, but the big issue comes when SBI just seems to move on. They completely forget about the content patch that they just put out and shift 100% of their focus onto the next one. It honestly feels to me like SBI watches for a week after the content patch hits, sees everyone having a grand old time, pats themselves on the back for the good work, calls it a day, and moves on to the next thing tomorrow. There is very little monitoring of the content to make sure that it stays enjoyable, and small patches to fix some of the issues that arise. Let's take the example of the Rise of Avalon content patch that introduced the Roads of Avalon that dropped on the 12th of August 2020. At first, this patch was amazing. It was every small-scale player's dream. There was constant skirmishing between small 7 and 20-man groups, fighting over rewarding objectives. But as time went on, the patch hype died down, population started to dwindle, issues arose, and the content started to become much less enjoyable, and a couple patches later, much less rewarding too. There were, and still are, plenty of issues that plague the roads, but one of the main ones is that despite being in the roads with a built-in population control, people would constantly get overwhelmed by numbers exactly the same as the Outlands. Solo gatherers would get ganked by 7-man groups in an already unfavorable environment. Duos looking for chests and fight would meet a similar fate by large gank groups or get blasted in a 2 vs 7 fight. And the 7-man parties didn't have it much better, as they would just get blasted by one of the 20-man groups roaming around. This, along with many other issues, made the roads unenjoyable for many players, and so the population of active roads players started to slowly decline until there was barely anyone in them. What was SBI's response? What did they do to save the roads? What patch did they implement to fix some of the prevailing issues and make content rewardable and enjoying again? Well, basically nothing. Since August 12, 2020, there have been no real meaningful changes made to the Roads of Avalon, relegating them to the mostly dead content world of Albion that only a select few enjoy. And the Rise of Avalon isn't alone. A similar story can be found for the content updates with Faction Warfare, Corrupted Dungeons, Hellgates, the Outlands, and pretty well everything else that I can think of. They get released, they're great for a short period of time, and then the issues start getting exposed, making them less enjoyable, and SBI does basically nothing to address it. I can literally think of only a single time where SBI meaningfully revised content after a patch. Corrupted Dungeons used to have this awful reset meta where people would just run away and reset the fight every time it didn't go 100% in their favor, so SBI added those bats that spawn to add a stacking debuff to people who try to reset 1,000 times a fight. Now, it took SBI a little longer than I would have liked to revise Corrupted Dungeons, with the bat patch coming a full year after their release, but overall that was a good change in what I expect from SBI, monitoring the content, seeing an issue, and implementing a solution. Unfortunately, Corrupted Dungeons need a whole lot more than that to be considered an enjoyable activity for most players, but this monitoring and updating the content is what we need to see on a much larger scale and frequency from SBI. Don't get me wrong, new content patches are great, I love them, and diverting resources to fix old content will directly affect any new content coming out, either in time or quality. There's a balance that always needs to be had between monitoring and updating old content and creating new content, but SBI is way out of balance, putting too much focus on the new content and ignoring the old. Half of the content in the game is basically dead and plagued with very obvious issues, so it's time for SBI to start focusing on that rather than pushing for new content which will just die out in a month due to the same neglect the old content suffers from. I honestly can't think of a single piece of content in Albion that doesn't have at least one glaring issue. Everything needs an update. Everything needs slight revisions, so rather than just going full throttle on new content and hoping players stick around long enough to try it out, it's time for SBI to start diligently working to revise the old and making Albion a stronger game overall. Now, I was going to leave it there, but I feel like people will take the wrong things out of this video if I do, so there's a couple things I should say. First, despite the fact that all the content in Albion has at least one glaring issue, that doesn't necessarily make it unenjoyable. A lot of content in Albion is still fun and enjoyable, but could just be a hell of a lot better with some simple changes. And second, despite the harsh criticisms of SBI in this video, overall I do think SBI is doing a pretty banger job with the game. Sure, this is one area that I think SBI could, or I would even say needs to improve, but besides this, they do a great job. I'm sure that all of you that have played a couple games in your time can tell that SBI could be doing a hell of a lot worse, as many game companies are these days. So overall, SBI is doing pretty well with Albion, but they really need to revisit their priorities when it comes to revising old content, because if they don't, Albion's one bad content update away from becoming a complete graveyard.